I might start if I could, Premier, and I'm going to change the tone a bit. I may cause a ruckus in the room, I'm afraid. The footy. I understand out of 8 teams, you have 4 of them from Victoria. Would you like to risk a
national competition. Yeah. Sadly, Essendon is not doing quite as well as I would like, although we've been pretty good these last few weeks. Getting the 4 points is harder than some might think. But look, it's a very healthy game at the moment. In fact, with AFLW as well, I think our national code, the code that is truly ours, in a sense, you know, the game that truly belongs to us, is in a very healthy space. And footy is really important, not just for this city, but indeed for the whole nation. It gets a little more challenging the further north you get, but yeah, it's in a pretty healthy place. I did not think you would ask me a football question when you said you were going to. Anyway, it's fine.
Well, maybe I'll ask you a question more so that you might have actually expected. You referenced energy and you referenced energy prices, and obviously the federal government has been trying in various ways over the years, not so successfully so far, to come up with some sort of solution. And obviously the National Energy Guarantee is in play at the moment, and there's a question around the level of transparency about how that is going to operate. Just wondering if you want to give us some reflections on what your thoughts are at the moment.
Well, then we were essentially asked to sign up to a set of arrangements, the details of which had not been provided to us. And if you think about the amount of renewable energy, the additional supply that we're putting into the grid because of change planning laws, Australia's biggest ever renewable auction, it's coming to a close, and we'll make some positive announcements about that quite soon. And a whole range of other incentives we've put in place, the legislative renewable energy target, so on and so forth. We've seen a real boom in the last 4 years. That extra supply puts downward pressure on prices, is good for households, good for businesses. It's also very good for creating jobs. You know, I was at Stockyard Hill not long ago. This is the Southern Hemisphere's biggest wind farm, 150 uprights, 650 megawatts around that, thousands of jobs in construction, less than that ongoing, but in small regional communities, 20, 30, 40 jobs ongoing that are not rainfall dependent are a very important thing. That's just one project among so many. We cannot sign up to agreements that we don't have the full details of, particularly when those very agreements that are talked about and offered up as, oh, this will provide certainty. Well, it could do exactly the opposite. Could cost investment, could cost jobs, and could put at risk that extra supply that we know is critical to putting downward pressure on prices. So we understand this market well, we understand the challenge, and our obligation is, of course, to be part of acting in the national interest, but also to make sure that we are fiercely parochial about protecting the competitive advantage we have as, I think, the renewable energy investment capital of our nation. That's what the future is all about. It is about further investments and making synchronous or dispatchable the renewable energy that we can produce on a cost curve that is coming down. This is becoming much more efficient, and this is the way that we will get more and more energy into the market, putting downward pressure on prices for households and businesses. That's electricity. We could talk about gas and the need for a domestic reserve. I can talk for literally hours on that for subjects if you want to, but that energy is complex, but the answers are more often than not quite simple if you just take the time to think and understand the problem. We've got to a final point on this. We've got, I think, to a point where policy at a national level is so bad and so confused that there are, and it's changed so often, that there is almost a push for anything would be better than the current uncertainty. I know many people in the room may think that's true. We should never settle for that. We should never settle for anything's better than the current. We should be much more confident, much more hopeful, much more committed to getting a good outcome, not just any old outcome. That's my position, and that's the advocacy that we bring to bear on this particular challenge.
Fantastic, good. Now we've got a question over there from the floor.
Thanks very much. Yep. Trevor Carr, recently retired Chair of Investment Committee at First State Super and still on the board at State Plus. Premier, the investments in infrastructure, particularly in health, from my own personal background, interested to hear your thoughts on how they're going to be financed. First State, of course, are partners in the new Bendigo Hospital, and would be very keen to become involved in other Triple P opportunities in the health industry or in other industries, in fact. But specifically for health, I easily understand roads and train infrastructure and Triple Ps in that space because you've got consumers paying along the way. But in the health system, it's much tougher. What will your position be in terms of how you fund, particularly some of the significant growth corridors on the urban fringe for new facilities for those parts of the state?
Well, Trevor, there's a couple of points I'd make in response to your question. I think partnerships are always the best way to go. If you want to get the biggest infrastructure agenda built, bigger than has ever been the case, and not just in one particular part, but in hospitals and schools, in road and rail, in the city, the suburbs, and into big regional centres and even the smallest of country towns, you need partners to get that job done. So we welcome investment, we welcome an innovative approach to how we can get that task done. The PPP landscape's a little different today than it's been. Post-GFC, the notion that you could just wholesale transfer risk off our balance sheet to someone else's, that's not the world we're living in. We've got some accounting standard changes coming up quite soon, which means we have to book at the start rather than when the asset is handed over. I don't see any of those things. It's changing. It's a different PPP product in a different market today than it's perhaps ever been. That just means we have to respond to it. We have to be even more clever in the way that we develop those partnerships around debt and equity, funding and finance, and knowing the difference between those two things. I think that if you create momentum, if you've got enough projects in the pipeline, if you've got a big order book, then I'm constantly, not amazed, I'm constantly pleased to note that industry will rise to that challenge in terms of innovation in design, innovation in how you procure and how you provide the capital needed to get the project done. So we are blessed to have a great construction and design industry. Banking, of course, is at its best in this city. So finance is something that we do very well. I'm confident that we can continue to refine that model so that it's an advantage to get that big task built. That will be our approach.
Premier, we have a question over here.
Premier, thank you very much for your time today. I'm Anton Leshen, General Manager with the Smith family, Australia's largest national charity focused on breaking the poverty cycle through education. And at the moment, we're scoping opportunities from your government partnerships addressing disadvantage, using social impact bonds as a means to grow philanthropy and, more importantly, grow educational outcomes. Could you expand on how that's going to contribute to the education state?
Well, thanks for your question and thanks for the work that you do, not only in supporting a lot of good work, but also advocating on behalf of those who are less fortunate. It's interesting, the Treasurer, very few people would expect that a Treasurer, one that is as focused as Treasurer Palace, would in fact be the greatest supporter of social impact bond reform that I've perhaps ever met. He is determined, and there are some who don't necessarily support him in that. It's not universally popular, but the notion of making part of the funding contingent on outcome, essentially bringing to not-for-profit task, the ultimate not-for-profit task in some respects, supporting the most disadvantaged in the community, bringing a private sector mentality to that you get paid on results, is not really new thinking, but the application of it is. We've got a number of pilots that are going on at the moment. I think from the briefs that I get, some of the visits I've made to see some of that work firsthand, they're all going very well. You've got to prove that model up because it is a big change. It is a big change in some respects because the responsibility to deal with them, to provide for the most vulnerable is not something that I think fits comfortably with a profit motive. But it's not about profit so much as it's about bringing corporate principles and some of the efficiencies and the effectiveness and the focus on outcomes, not just on inputs, that the private sector is well known for. It's about using those strengths. Again, back to Trevor's point, being about partnership. I think it's worked well. I don't know that everyone would necessarily agree with that, but I think it has, and we'll look at the evaluation of those pilots and if we can do more in some specific targeted areas, and if we can get that partnership between government, the private sector, and the philanthropic sector, that is the real sweet spot, I think, for making profound change, particularly for the most disadvantaged, noting that skills, retraining, those empowering, that educational attainment is perhaps nothing more empowering than that.
I just add from the banker's perspective, we've worked on a number of these bonds around Australia, and I've got to say there is huge demand from investors just in terms of sustainability, getting in the sustainable space. And as we get those metrics working and work in partnership, I think there is tremendous opportunity there over time. So, great question. A question over there, Premier.
Premier Hervey Carlos from Engineers Australia. Can you please comment on how important the Engineers Registration Bill is to your infrastructure policy and spends, please?
Our partnership with Engineers Australia is very important to us. The Chief Engineer is important as a critical reform to see this profession, and it is a diverse profession, but to see it, if I can be forgiven to call it just a profession, to see it as a strategic set of workers without whom we just can't get the task done. I think we've elevated the profile, the platform, and the regard that's given to engineers and their strategic place in our infrastructure agenda. I think we've elevated that properly. I think that there's just about every significant engineering firm in the country's got an office in Melbourne at the moment. We have pinched a whole lot of engineers from right around the country, and I aim to make sure you've got enough work so that you can stay. Because we need you, and we also need to value the work you do and plan for. Your workforce development challenge is in fact our infrastructure delivery challenge. So we have a shared purpose in getting that right. And I think the bill and the registration framework, the Office of the Chief Engineer, the other work that we've done, again led by the Treasurer, really sets us up well.
Another question over here, Premier.
Hello, Premier. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for your investment into the medical research sector.
Do you mind just
in
stating
Victoria.
your name?
Oh, sorry. My name's Sam Ludolf, and I work at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute for Medical Research. So I'd like to thank you for your investment into the medical research sector in Victoria for the operational infrastructure support. First investment in over a decade, and the 13 organisations really appreciate that. As we've discussed before, there still is a big gap between the research, the fantastic research that we do here in Victoria, and translating that and commercialising it. I'm keen to hear with your big and bold ideas what your thoughts are on how we might do that moving forwards.
I think time is probably against us to map out a comprehensive science and biotechnology policy. What I will say though is I agree with you completely that we are well known for having great science. The notion of then being able to translate that into pre-commercialisation or a commercial outcome, and it's not just from a pharmaceutical point of view, it's not just the next blockbuster drug, it's implantables, medical devices, it's diagnostic tools. It's a very, very diverse sector, and we are well placed in terms of the quality of our knowledge and our understanding, the quality of the work and output. We're very well placed. It is very frustrating to see so many of those products come to their ultimate corporate conclusion, their profit centre conclusion, a long way away from here. We won't necessarily be able to have all of that value chain here. We just need to make sure we have more of it. And the steps we took last year to change the way we fund medical research and to increase funding, I'm very grateful for your acknowledgement of that. I was in Israel late last year, and every time you visit, you see they've got a different culture to us. They've got a much more risk-accepting and engaging culture. That serves them well when it comes to application development, tech in a broader sense, and of course, pharma, biotechnology, medical research, pure and applied, basic research as well. We have to do more in this space. A national approach would be very good. A national approach would be very good, and you could start with the tax treatments for those slightly risky investments where the payout at the end is potentially enormous, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of benefits for longevity and for our world. We'll have more to say in this space, but I've probably already taken enough time today. I hope you get a sense. I understand there's a challenge, and also understand that we're so blessed to have this. It's a good problem to have. We just need to do a little bit more, and if we can have a Commonwealth government that backs us in, then I think that we can do some amazing things in this space.
We want Victoria to be at the forefront, and we also strongly think that we want to get our lion's share of the 1.5 billion from the Medical Research Future Fund and also the lion's share from the Biomedical Translation Fund as well. So the sector's ready and open and keen to discuss all our ideas.
You and I are shamelessly pro-Victorian when it comes to that.
There's a question up the back there.
Thank you, Premier. Laurie Argus from Melbourne Airport. I noticed you mentioned some of your priorities today, but you haven't mentioned the Melbourne Airport rail link. Just wondering where that sits on your list of priorities.
Very good. Thanks very much for your question, and thanks for running the nation's biggest curfew-free airport. It's fantastic. It's good, particularly given that our city is open after dark, so you need that curfew-free airport. The Melbourne Airport rail link is really very important, but we see it as not just a project that starts and ends with a connection between the city and Melbourne Airport. If done properly, and this is all about the alignment that you choose, and recently we made some announcements that we would provide our share, our matching $5 billion, and that beyond that we favour, and we've got very good reason to favour, that Albion or Sunshine Corridor, where not only is it about providing that direct, proper airport rail link to Melbourne Airport and the city, but it also allows you, with further electrification into the west of the metropolitan system, it allows you to then separate regional and metro services and paves the way for some big investments, and bold investments, to deliver real first-class fast rail to the regions. Geelong in the first instance, Ballarat beyond that. This is in the order of sub 30-minute services to Geelong, sub 1 hour services to Ballarat, so on and so forth. So choosing the right corridor was always important, because if you don't choose that Sunshine Corridor, then you can't do airport and regional rail link. And that's what we're fundamentally committed to doing. And that's what we've committed our $5 billion to. And that's what we'll get on with if we're given that opportunity of a second term.
Premier, we have a question up there.
Hi, Premier. My name is Marushka and I'm from the Telstra Foundation. It's quite clear that Victoria is a state in the midst of digital, cultural and economic transformation, and that will clearly require an investment in the skilled workforce, as you mentioned, and the workforce of the future. In line with that, I wanted to ask about your plans for empowering Victorian students to pursue careers in growth areas like STEM, and what you see as the opportunity in industries and sectors that support those skills.
Look, I think the point you make is a very good one, that we've got a strategic advantage, a bit of a head start when it comes to the capability that you're referencing. We already have more IT graduates in this state than any other state, and that's something we should be very proud of. It's not something that everybody knows about. In terms of promoting this sort of career pathway, these competencies, knowing that you may well be working in lots of different jobs, but you'll need these core skills, that starts at school, and there's a whole range of different programs that we've run, too numerous to mention, but I'll just focus on one for a moment. Tech schools were gotten rid of 30 years ago. We're bringing them back. I'll be opening one of them tomorrow morning as part of our the 10 that we committed to deliver. And this is a regional facility where students from both the Catholic Independent and the government sector from grade 6 all the way through to year 12 can spend time each week, each month. So it's not a question of an academic education or a technical education. It's the acknowledgement that you can only get a proper education if it includes both. So because we've got scale, because there's 10 of these, you can put the best mass spectrometer in there, you can put the best digital printer, something that you could never afford at a localised level. This is about tasting courses as well, where you get an opportunity to experience what it might be like to work in a particular field. So that's competency, but it's also sparking interest, and hopefully lots and lots of young people getting a sense that that might be a pathway that they want. The pathway is less important than their determination that they have to get those set of skills, those competencies, in order to pursue that and allied trades, allied pathways later. That's just one example. There's a lot more, many, many others. I think a healthy TAFE system is really important to this, and often so many of those TAFE providers are part of a dual sector environment as well, so the pathways onto university and higher education nothing beats having a strong vocational education and training system. And I think our TAFE system is in the strongest position it's been in for a while, but there's still more work to be done there. Our private sector providers are important as well, and I think that we can be much happier and much more confident in terms of quality in our private training market today because of work that we've done. I think we're very, very well placed. We do so much of this really well now, but we have an appreciation of the urgency of this task as well, and we tackle it in lots of different ways, from tech schools at a very localised level, curriculum in primary school, all the way through to giving pathways and industry partnerships. Just finally, 10% of all of those 75,000 staff I spoke about before that are building those level crossing removal projects, schools, hospitals, road and rail, 10% of those have to be apprentices, cadets or engineering cadets or trainees. That procurement policy, not just buying local but embedding skills attainment as part of our local procurement policy, that's another practical thing that we can do to push and to promote those skills, because we need them now and we'll need them even more in the future.
Another question up the back of the room there.
Hello, Premier. Mandy Davidson from RPS Group and also Deputy Chair of the International Association of Public Participation here in Australasia. You talked about Australia's biggest investment in infrastructure and also talked about being brave enough to get the hard projects done. What opportunities are there to involve the community in the decision making around those projects, and how committed is your government to doing that?
Well, I think the first thing is to have a clear agenda and to outline it and detail it in as clear terms as possible. We said we'd get rid of 50 level crossings, and we were very clear which ones they'd be, and that we would be guided by the best engineering advice in order to deliver those level crossing removals, and that's exactly what we've done. And we haven't wasted any time doing it. We said we would crack on and get the Melbourne Metro project off the shelf where it had been gathering dust, and get on and take the busiest line out of the city loop, create extra space within the current loop, but also deal with that busiest corridor. We said we would make trains locally, we have. We've been true to the commitments that we've made, both with those things we would proceed with and those things that we wouldn't. And we've been criticised sometimes for that, but we were very, very clear about what our priorities would be. And over these next 100 days, I will again lay out a clear agenda, a clear set of projects, plans, priorities, and then Victorians will make their choice. And then it will be my job to get on and, as we have these last 4 years, deliver on the commitments that we've made and not waste a moment doing it. So the community could not be more involved, This will be, I think, a referendum this election on who gets things done, who's got a plan for the future, and who's up for getting things done, for actually having the courage to push through and deliver. That's what the election will be about, and Victorians will make their choice. There's no better way for the community to be involved than that.
And the last question, Premier, at the back of the room.
Premier Andrews, my name is Danny Addison. I'm the Victorian Chief Executive of the Urban Development Institute, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege to hear from you today, so thank you very much for your time. It would be difficult to leave a forum like this without raising a question about housing and housing choices for Victorians, and your government's been very strong on the Homes for Victorians strategy, and in particular making sure that first home buyers have an opportunity to enter the market. But with our rental vacancy rate at about 1.8%, and according to the Demographia International study, we're the 5th least affordable city in the world in ratio to our incomes, what is your government's policy position and vision for enabling more housing opportunities, both of rental tenure, of potential new asset classes and of home ownership, not just now but into the next 4 years of future if you should get elected?
We'll be making some further announcements about housing affordability and how we deal with the challenges of a growing city and state, and some of the clear pressure that's in both the rental market and the property market in a broader sense. Rather than me trying to skirt around things I might announce later on, we will have more to say, but I'll just take you back to, and you're very kind in your commentary about Homes for Victorians, the package that we released some time ago. By way of update, I think we're at about 30,000 first home buyers that have paid less stamp duty because of the changes we made. I think 22,000 of those 30,000 have paid no stamp duty whatsoever because of the thresholds we've put in place and the policy that we've put forward. What's probably less well known is that our shared equity product, our toe in the water when it comes to offering a product like that, has been fully subscribed. Work around a first home buyer's reserve and using the planning system to make the contest for a first home a much fairer fight, so that you've got first home buyers competing against each other as opposed to a first home buyer competing against an investor that might be on their 5th or 6th or 50th house. There's a whole range of different things that we've done within that document that I think are delivering really significant benefits. But there's always more to do in this space, so a mixture of land release, land use planning, activity centres, transport's very important to this as well in terms of activating spaces and creating new centres of creating new urban centres. There's a lot of talk about trying to push people into different parts of the state. I don't favour that. I think that you build good services, you build strong communities, those communities will get bigger. I think trying to shepherd people into one part of the state or another, I don't know that that's necessarily the way forward. That's a long way of me saying I think we've got a good record in this space and we'll add to it over these next 100 days with some ideas that will push the market to be fairer and push the market to meet a growing challenge and ultimately allow more young people to get into their first home much, much sooner in an environment where banks are running the toughest book they've run ever and where prices are stabilising but are still beyond the reach of many.
Fantastic, Premier, thank you. And I'm now going to have great pleasure in inviting Jeff Connolly, who's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Siemens, to the stage to give the formal vote of thanks today.